welcome. You might see a couple new faces this morning. I'm going to introduce our guest instructor, David Langford, in a minute. You also, Chris Chapman's been joining us throughout this last week. He's a future guest instructor for the psychology unit. And then Adrienne Bass is joining us. Adrienne has been with CQI, IQI since the very beginning. She's been a fundamental force in our organization. And she recently retired and got busier in her life. And we're happy to see that she wanted to join us today. Let's get started. So as a reminder, here's some things that we were covering: our Teach to Learn conversations from Friday's psychology session, as well as our initial Move to Improve notes. Several people reported some version of learning and progress through doing that exercise. Today's conversation and key concept for our session, as well as for your Teach to Learn conversations, is the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle. We'll be developing a plan for our next PDSA work. Today's guest instructor is David Langford of Langford Learning. I learned from David initially through the Deming library tapes, and then from his numerous Deming Institute talks. I've attended one of David's 4-day seminars for educators. He was asked by Dr. Deming to bring the system of profound knowledge into education, and he's done that in school districts around the world. We're very fortunate to have David join us today as a guest instructor for the IQI Academy. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Welcome. Welcome to you too. So you must be very important people to get me up at 6 a.m. in the morning. So
that's right. You're in Montana right now, aren't you?
That's right.
All right. So let's move on. So go ahead, David.
You're ready, set, go. Okay.
Ready, set, go. Yep.
All right. Yeah. So I was thinking this morning about what's my job, and I got that from Dr. Deming. And I remember at one of the seminars, somebody asked a very detailed question about something, and he looked at them and he said, "You don't know what your job is. Is that it?" So I understand my job this morning is just to kind of go through PDSA cycle, give you a little bit of overview, give you some insight of some questions, some ways to think about it that maybe you haven't really thought about yet. As Eric said, most of my work's been in education and worldwide, and Deming did challenge me to bring Deming thinking to education, and so now my job is done. Educators all over the world understand all this, and I can stop now, I think. So no, it's been a continual journey. So PDSA has been the cornerstone of how I work with people, whether it's in industry, military, education, whatever it might be. It is so simple that I teach it to kindergarten teachers about how to work with children to improve a kindergarten class. And it has so much depth to it that I've seen it at work solving some of the biggest problems in the world about how people go about making approaches. And that's the way I've always thought about it. A lot of times when people start out and they look at Plan, Do, Study, Act, and they think, oh yeah, well, it's so simple. So is EM squared, and so is a lot of other things that when we look at it at the surface, we think is so simple. I think about the story about Picasso. A lady came up to him and said, "Oh, master, can you draw me a picture?" And he took the pad and he drew one line. And he handed it back to her and he said, "That'll be $20,000. And she said, "Well, it's only one line." He said, "Yes, but it took me 50 years to get to that point." So It's the same kind of thing with PDSA. On the surface, you look at it and you say, okay, plan, do, study, act, I get it. Okay, what's next? But when you start to really think about, what's involved with that and what can be done with that, I think that's where the power of it is. So first thing I have to kind of explain to you is that when I started down this road myself and learning about PDSA and the application and thinking about that, I had to get it straight in my mind. What was I trying to do? Was I just trying to improve something? Was I trying to radically change something into, a totally different system? What was happening with that? Sometimes people get PDSA confused with the scientific method. And Deming was really adamant about that. No, that scientific method is not trying to improve nature. So the scientists don't go out to study, red-tailed hawks with the idea that I'm going to improve the red-tailed hawks. I'm going to make a change in that system. Working through that, mostly it's just observation and learning from observation through that. Now, sometimes does come into play with that, but PDSA is an improvement cycle. So you're going about using it to make something better, not just to understand it in its current state. So that's kind of the way I think about it. My students years ago coined the term PROBLETUNITY. Mm-hmm. And that's been kind of the cornerstone of my work, is that what you're really after is understanding PROBLETUNITIES, so that everything you work on is a problem. It may be a problem, but it's an opportunity to improve it. And it's really funny that little kids, that sometimes they have trouble saying the word PROBLETUNITY as they stumble over that, but they just get it. And I think that's what you want to think about as a manager or somebody trying to improve some aspect of something, is what is the problem opportunity that I'm trying to work through? Because sometimes you are trying to solve a problem, but other times you're trying to work on something that there is no existing answer to, because if there was, we would have already been doing it, And so you have this huge opportunity to do something that has never been done before. So when I think of PDSA, typically I think about the plan stage as being 50% at least of the whole process, sometimes even more. If you get the planning process right, the do stage actually becomes relatively easy. We already know what we want to have, what we want to do, and we just implement it. And then we've already built in a way to monitor it and study what we went through. And then we have a way to reflect about it. So if you think about, I'm going to spend all my time in the planning stage. I think it was Abraham Lincoln that said, if I had 7 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 6 hours sharpening the axe. That's planned. I'm going to spend 6 hours sharpening the axe. Am I working on the right thing? Do I have the right people involved? What are we going to do when we actually come up with a potential improvement? The other thing I want to kind of impress on you is that from the very beginning, you want to think about, I'm not just doing a PDSA just to, fill time or just willy-nilly trying to work on something. At some point, you're going to try to persuade somebody else to do something, right? When you get to that do stage, you're going to ask your manager for funds to implement a project, or your colleagues to actually change some aspect of what it is they're doing. So the more you think about that in the planning stage up front, you start to think about, okay, how do I ensure by the time we get to the do stage that I've got a lot of people on board and this improvement or this change that we're about to make is well supported? So you don't want to do a PDSA, in my mind, and in the closet and then suddenly leap out in the do stage and say, okay, I've done all this work and isn't this great? And then so here's what I want you to do. You'll just end up with a lot of naysayers and resistance, and you'll end up spending most of your time placating the resistors versus implementing the strategy that you wanted to implement anyway. So how do you get there? How do you get to stage 5 and kind of ensure that you're going to have people on board? Well, one of the best ways that I know of is that before you even start a step into the process in the PDSA, think about creating a storyboard. Where is that storyboard going to be posted? The story of your improvement effort. So it can be just so simple as rolling out some, butcher paper 20 feet long. And every time you do anything with a team or there's any level of thinking or something that goes on, you're going to put it on that storyboard. And that's going to be such a boon to you by the time you get to the do stage, because anybody that's new to the organization, for instance, or new to your process, you could take them to your storyboard and say, okay, look, we started with this, then we did this, then we did this, then we did this. And that led us to understand this, and now we're here, okay? So I may not agree with you that you're in the do stage is the thing we need to be doing. At least I can see how you got there. So a storyboard is critically important. You don't want to have a situation where you're saying at the do stage to people, hey, we got together and we thought about it and we decided that. Because you know what? I got together with people I know and we decided that you're nuts and that you really haven't done a good job, right? So your job is to try to create the story, that yellow brick road that's leading you to Oz in stage 5. And the better job that you do of documenting that, the easier it's going to be at the implementation stage. So having thought through that, I basically think of the plan stage in 4 different stages. So there's initial condition stage, and then there's the defining stage, and then there's the understanding stage, and then the study of the causes stage. So under the initial conditions, you want to do things, whether you're using tools, flow charts, bubble charts, whatever it might be, you want to do things at the initial conditions under planning where you're saying, okay, what system are we working on? Deming often talked a lot about, you start with the largest system over which you have influence. So we can complain about the boss should do this or somebody else should do this, but the chances are that you're going to get somebody else to do something is not nearly as powerful as you look at what system am I managing and what am I doing. And that's where, Deming's systems model or the flow chart for the process of how to improve that comes into play individually. And Deming talked a lot about that this is the transformation of an individual. So you want to think about, you're really trying to transform your thinking. You're not trying to actually make other people do stuff. And when you transform your thinking, you're going to transform their thinking in the process. So you want to do stuff to identify what is that system that I'm thinking about. And then within that system, you want to start to think about what are all the possible probabilities within that system. So I don't know if Eric's gotten much into tools yet, but there's things like affinity diagrams or just brainstorming or force field analysis or ways that you start to think about, what are all the possible opportunities that we are looking at. You want to do that because you don't want to get down the road and have somebody say, oh, I see that you wanted to work on this and this was your PROBLETUNITY, but what about this and what about that and what about this problem? We got this problem over here. So the more at that initial stage, that initial condition, that you can show that, yeah, we thought about this, and this. That's that brainstorming, that huge list of all the possible opportunities we could be working on, right? You can always then come back to people and say, yeah, we considered that, but here's why we didn't narrow that down as having the most opportunity. Also, under the initial conditions, then you can't work on everything. You can't have a shotgun approach to, okay, we got 40 problems here. I'm going to have 40 teams implementing 40 strategies, and I can almost just guarantee you're not going to get anywhere. And at the end of that, everybody say, well, it was a nice exercise. Now let's get back to work. So you're going to have to do something as part of initial conditions and planning to prioritize, to narrow it down, to focus. What is our focus and what relatively gives us the biggest impact? So using something like an interrelationship diagram is really good to understand how here are all the PROBLETUNITIES that we're looking at, and this is the one that's going to give us the biggest bang for a buck. If we do this, it's going to affect 7 other areas of the organization. It's another way that you're getting people on board with you, right? They're seeing that, oh, wow, if we just work on that, we're going to have a bigger system impact in a lot of different areas, okay? You want to think about things like, who are the stakeholders, who's involved in this, who's going to be affected by this improvement process, and who's on the team, right? Do you have the right people on this team? So you might start with just a team of you, but very quickly you're going to have to start to think about, man, do we need a customer perspective in this? Do we need a manager, supervisor perspective in this? Do I need colleagues in this? Who needs to be on this team for us to really address this problem and really do it well? So that's kind of all initial conditions. So the second stage of that is now the defining stage. And that's where you're using operational definitions, and you're using problem statements, anything that you can do to really define this problem and opportunity in terms, and share that with other people so that you're all working on the same page. I can't tell you how many times people have gotten to the do stage in the PDSA cycle, and then they find out that, oh, wait, I thought I was working on this, and really somebody else thought they're working on this. And so that defining stage where you're defining that PROBLETUNITY is really very critical in figuring out who are the customers, what are their perceptions, how is this going to affect that, what changes is this going to make, et cetera, within that stage. My best story about operational definitions is that my son was in high school. He started having a cup of tea every night, and within a few days, he said, my bowels are pretty loose, and I've just not been able to process things correctly, everything. And then we happened to notice that he was drinking this tea called Smooth Move, which is a tea that helps your bowels get moving. And we said, what are you drinking that tea for if you're having this problem? And he said, well, I just thought it was a cool tea, Smooth Move tea, it's really cool tea to drink. So operational definitions can really get things going if you really understand, the importance of that. Once you really define things, you want to think about understanding the current situation, right? Do we really understand in that planning stage what's going on Is there a flow chart, a current process or flow? So sometimes when you start through that, you say, okay, well, the reason that we're working on this is we don't have a flow. We don't have a process. Well, recognize that that's data, right? The absence of data is data. Where you say, oh, this is why we're doing this, because we don't have insights of understanding there is no existing process. Or when you start to flow out, I know Eric's introduced a little bit about flow charting, but when you start to flow out the existing process, you often start to see the dysfunction almost immediately. And sometimes the dysfunction is people can't flow it out. They can't figure it out. I remember I was working with a really large school district, and they had narrowed down their problem was that the teachers were complaining that the textbooks weren't showing up in the fall in a timely manner. So we got everybody involved with that process and started to flow out the process. Well, the people in the warehouse could flow out their process, and the people in the schools could flow out their process when the textbooks actually involved or arrived. But nobody could. No, there was a no man's land in between. Nobody had any real clue about how and when these books actually left the warehouse and arrived at certain sites and went through that. And so it was like this big aha that people are all of a sudden like, oh, well, that's the problem. And when you go through that process, it helps you move out of the blame game. Because I would say that at the beginning in a planning stage, everybody wants to blame somebody, right? Well, we know what the problem is, and it's the people in the warehouse, or we know what the problem is, and it's management, or we know what the problem is, and because it's a whole lot easier to blame somebody than it is to actually blame the system and then go about fixing that system within that. So in that sort of stage 3 of the planning process, you want to think about not only is there a current process, flow, or approach, but what data do we need, or data, depending on what part of the country you're from, to measure the current situation. And this is really going to be really important when you get down to the study stage. So here's where you want to think about: do we have the right data? Are we studying, or does it exist? Right? And it might be so simple as, yeah, it's all in the computer somewhere. I remember a second grader was asking a manager one time, do you have any data on something? And he said, the manager said, yeah, we have data on stuff. And the kid said, well, where is it? And he said, it's all in the computer. And the second grader looked at him. He said, can we get it out of there? So this is where you get it out of there. You get it out of the computer, and I don't care if you use a box of crayons and a chart, and you make a Pareto chart, or you make some kind of a data chart, a pie chart, or bar graph, whatever it might be, to try to show what is this current situation that we're dealing with, And it's also back to the whole why thing. Why are we working on this? So when you get to that data stage, you selected your probability, you really defined what's important within that. And then in stage 3, now you're looking at the data that's either supporting your theory, right? Because so far it's just a theory that you have. My theory is that this part of the organization screwed up, or we could do better in this area, or something, right? That's a theory. But now you're starting to get to the point where you're starting to say, okay, do we have any data that's supporting our theory? So that's just whether you're doing surveys, sampling, you're doing you run chart, control chart. What's the data trying to tell us? Okay. The variation in every system is trying to tell you something, and it's whether or not you're actually listening is the key. So when you're documenting that, you want to add that to your storyboard so that anybody looking at the history of your improvement process can start to see that, oh, okay, now we can understand why we're working on this. And it's not so much that it has to be a huge data piece where you start to show, oh, how terrible things are. Effort from going from 91% effectiveness to 92%, right? Can we get better is basically where we're at with that. So okay, so you got your initial conditions. Why are we working on this, right? You've got PROBLETUNITY, okay? You define terms, process, anything you need to do with that. Now you've understood the current situation. You got some data. Try to understand why are we working on this? Why is this important? Or if there is no data, right? You're working on something that good data sets have not been formed, have not been set up, have not been in place for a long period of time, right? So you have to think about, okay, how would we go about this? What data would we need? And then you want to think about also at that stage, what's the prediction of that system? Deming sometimes talked about here's that and predict that this is the problem.
David, can you repeat that? You broke up for me for a minute. What did Deming say?
That there's no learning without prediction, right? Because that's theory. I got a theory. I'm making a prediction. I'm thinking ahead. And when you make those predictions and then you compare that to the actual data, that's another part of the planning stage where you're like, aha, oh, we thought X was the problem, and it's clearly not the problem. I remember working with a really pretty large school district, and they were working on the problem that they had a lot of very low income children who were low performing, right? And the lady that was in charge of this area and everything, she'd already come up with a whole solution, right? We're going to send over the summer, we're going to send buses out and we're going to gather up all these kids from outlying areas, rural areas, and we just know that they're the problem. And we're going to gather them all up and we're going to bring them in and give them training in the summer and everything, and we're going to go through stuff. I got her to slow down and say, okay, well, do you have any data on that? What is the actual data? And a lot of times people are resistant to doing that. Well, I just know what the problem is. So I always use the phrase, in God we trust, all others must bring data. So, you may have divine intervention that the rest of us don't have, but the rest of us need to kind of see, why do you think this is so important? Well, we finally got her to go out and collect the data, and she was so amazed that she came running in one day and she said, I was wrong. I can't believe it. I was totally wrong. And what she found out is that 90% of all the low performing kids that they were trying to help were within a 2-mile radius of the central office. So they were right in her back door. So sometimes money is a big hindrance. If you got a lot of money where you can go and do stuff, well, she would have chartered buses. She would have paid teachers to do all this outlying stuff when 90% of the problem was in her backyard. Kids were almost within walking distance that they could get them together. So it's really important to understand that current situation, because it's going to help you later on when you actually do start to implement a theory and redesign. So also part of the planning stage. So we've got initial conditions, defining the probability, understanding the current situation, and then stage 4 is understanding the causes of this. Okay, so you just don't want to willy-nilly start coming up with new things to do without understanding the causes of the current situation. So things like fishbone diagrams, interrelationship diagrams, lotus diagrams, all really good tools at that point to think about, you know, what is this variation of in the current performance, and why is it this way? How do we get to this point? 5 whys is a really good thing to do at that stage. I think it was Peter Schultes that said he was in Japan and he made some reference to 5 whys, and the Japanese manager said, you'll have 5 whys. And he said, yes. And the manager said, oh, you must be really, really good. You know, because we do at least 12 whys. Why is this happening? Why is that happening? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? Where did that come from? And really understanding the causes of that current situation. Because if you don't do that, you're going to spend a whole lot of time and money fixing things that didn't need to be fixed in the first place. Because you don't understand the causes of it, what's really making it. Okay, so if you've spent 50% of your PDSA time on the planning stage, you can tell that that's going to take a lot of time to work through that. And that's also to develop a commitment to this improvement cycle, right? When people have put that much time in, looking at the initial conditions, defining the probability, understanding the current situation, and studying the causes, they're going to be much more committed to coming up with a new theory to implement, right? Because they've been part of the journey within that. So now you're to the do stage, right? So if you've done a really good job in the planning stage and to get there, the do stage actually becomes relatively easy. So what are all the possible improvements or designs that you might be looking at? What are all the theories for improvement? And you want to get as many minds involved in thinking about this at this stage as you possibly can, because you start to get that creativity stage, and this is what I call the fun stage, right? Where you really get to think about, well, what if we did this, and what if we did that, and what if we implemented this, and how might that affect the current situation? And would that really address the causes of this current situation and what we're working things through? And that's actually really fun, you know, to do mind mapping, or have a tool called If Then, that if we did this, then what do we think would happen? So that helps you extrapolate out safely, right? Without running off and changing this, changing that, and doing stuff. You can sort of extrapolate out, what if we did this, then do we think that would give us the impact that we need to have? And once again, you're building support from anybody, whether that's customers, supervisors, colleagues, whatever it might be within the organization, that, okay, we're about to implement a new change. And so we need support for that. So when you finally get it narrowed down, that here are all the possible kinds of things that we could do, and we've decided that given the time, money, and effort that we have at this point in time, we're going to go with this possible theory that of implementation of what we're going to do, right? So what are the key actions to that? Who's going to lead that? key action? What are the timelines? What are the resources that we have to deal with? That's all part of that do stage. And it's sort of like you're doing a mini PDSA within the do stage, right? Because you're looking at all the resources, the planning, everything else, and now you're coming up with how are we actually going to do this, right? Implement this process. So now you've come up with your theory, right? And you're going to do it, and you're going to implement that, and that's going to take a period of time to try to see, you know, did we get the results that we want to see through that? So now you're to study the results. So the reason I try to get people to do so much work in the planning stage under understanding the current situation, whether that's looking at a process flow or looking at a run chart or whatever it might be, because that's the baseline data in the planning stage that you're going to need to study the results in the study stage. Hopefully that makes sense. So in the planning part, if you've already identified what is that baseline data and what is the current situation showing us, then it's going to be really easy in the study to say stage to look at that same data and say, did it work? Did we actually affect the change? Did we improve the average or decrease the average, or depending on whatever it is you're trying to work on or what you're trying to work through? So that's why it's so important in the planning stage to get that data. So in stage 7, if you've done a really good job in the planning stage, that's pretty easy. We're just able to take a look at that and say, did our do stage, our theory for improvement, did it actually make a difference in the situation? And sometimes at that point, you've got to go all the way back again, right? We thought this was the problem. We implemented this new solution. You know what? We made things worse, or or things got better, or whatever it might be. But maybe it didn't get good enough, right? Yeah, it got a little better, but you really didn't get the impact that we wanted to have with it, right? So that's why PDSA is a cycle of improvement and not just the law where you do this and implement this and go on. You're actually thinking about what it is we did. And then finally, you're to the ACT stage. And it took me a long time to sort of understand what does ACT mean and what did Deming mean by that. And so to me, ACT means that you're now taking action on what you've learned, implemented, and studied, right? And you've got a new solution. Now, what are you going to do with that new solution? So you've got new employees coming in next year that weren't a part of this improvement process. How do you act on that? How do you standardize that? How do you pass this improvement to the next generation? Or maybe you're not even going to be here next year, right? You're moving on to another job or another position or whatever. Can you pass on to the next generation that improvement process that you went through? And to me, that's what the ACT stage is. Can we standardize that? So we got a standardized process now that all new employees will go through this training, or all new employees will go through this flow charting, this process, right? And then it's to the last part of that ACT stage is thinking about reflecting and establishing future plans. So basically the key phrase here is good enough. So maybe you've gone through this whole PDSA, you've implemented this change, et cetera, and you start to say, yeah, we got some improvement, but it's not good enough. Okay, now you're back to the planning stage again. And here we go again. And you're using that cycle just to continually layer on, new insights and understanding. I think the key impact with all this is that sometimes I tell people that PDSA is a learning cycle. That's what you're really after. what are we learning about going through this process, through the planning process, the implementation process, the do stage and the act stage? What new insights and gains did we make that we're actually not just recycling ignorance, but we are making breakthroughs continually. So, all right, I wanted to reserve a little bit of time here, 5 minutes or so, where anybody has questions or clarifications or yabbits. You know what a yabbit is, right? Yeah, but.
I have a question. So, is the act also kind of like, so you said like you're kind of standardizing the process. So could you go through the cycle and do your planning, do the planning stage, do your do, study the data, and then your act? Could it be like something like, okay, you implemented this process, but you don't have like a standard operating procedure written or something like that? Would that be kind of what you would put into that category?
Yeah, I always think about it as, how do we make sure that we don't have to work on this again next year? Right. So maybe that's just the employee manual has to be rewritten, or maybe these are just process charts that, we need to make sure that, they're colorized and they're on every person's desk and everybody can, so people can see the process. Deming said, if you can't see the process, you don't have one. Which I always put that in the back of my mind. I said, where's the process? We all know the process. Oh, no, you don't. No, you're just building in a lot of variation. So yes, exactly. Have you documented that? And then secondly, how are you going to make sure that new people coming in can get up to this level before we go to the next level, right? So do you have a process to train them? And maybe your process is simply that all new employees are going to go through training about how to read a flow chart and follow it. Not so much that they're going to follow the exact process that you've identified. So hopefully that helps. What else?
I guess I have a question for you, David. This is Eric. When enterprises or business put so much stock in return of investments, and this is a cycle of learning, right? How do you balance the two, in terms of, change, once it starts creeping into budgets and operating expenses?
What's that phrase? We don't have time to do it right in the first place, but we always have time to redo it, or something like that, right? So it's getting it in the minds with, ROI. This is a process for ROI, right? Are we working on the right things? Are we working on the things that are going to give us the biggest bang for the buck, right? If we implement a change in this area, it's actually going to affect 7 other areas. Well, that's a big ROI. That's huge. And these things, some things can be quantified, but sometimes the best things can't be quantified. It's just giving us a feeling, or a esprit de corps, or a level of performance that often will show up somewhere as an ROI, but it's giving us a capability and a level of performance that we didn't have before. But I think that ROI thing is also part of the planning process, P, right? Are we working on the right thing, and what are the dollar amounts attached to this, and is it going to give us the big bang for buck that we're seeking within that? And if you've done a good job in the planning process and you compare that to your study results process, the ROI is going to be there.
Thanks. Couldn't agree more.
Well, David, this has been excellent. I wish we could have more time to continue on. David has volunteered to read and perhaps comment on your Teach to Learn notes from today. So as you send those to me or make those available, I'll forward those to David, and you might have a chance to get some additional feedback about the things that you've heard, and then as you try and teach these to other people, we can comment and see how well we've actually been doing the teaching today. So that would be beneficial. The assignment that we have for today is to look at and create our personal version of what are some of the questions that we should be asking about or addressing throughout the PDSA cycle. And we've received excellent guidance from David today on here's some things to be doing. David's brought up the concept of using a variety of useful tools to provide guidance along the way. David has, if you go to his website, he has a couple of manuals on excellent tools. David, I forget the title that you have.
We have a tool time book. We have tool time for education, one for business, one for healthcare.
Yeah, and they're excellent. I've used those tools in a variety of settings. And if you're interested, we can also do an office hours on any particular tool that you're interested in. So those are things to be used. And I would recommend, if you have the time and would like to, go to David's website and pick up a copy for yourself, because those are very excellent guides. So we're looking at especially our plan section for this week. What are the things that you're going to do to plan your next move to improve? In today's appointments for yourself, you want to answer the why and the what worksheet questions, and then address your My PDSA form. You're going to be submitting your Teach to Learn notes, and then continuing on with 14 points conversations. Those aren't due until tomorrow. You don't need to focus on those today necessarily, but if you have appointments for them, that would be great. Today's concept is PDSA. These are the forms. I'll be sending out a notice for office hours for Tuesday, tomorrow at 3 p.m. I don't have it in my schedule today that I can meet again, but we can meet for additional work on any of these items tomorrow. Our theory of knowledge quotes for today. One's from Jeff Hawkins. I highly recommend this book, or both of his books, On Intelligence and 1,000 Brains, A New Theory of Intelligence. One of the quotes from Jeff is, "You cannot learn the structure of the world without moving." From Katie Anderson, she says, "Learning is never perfect, it's never complete. Purposeful, honest self-reflection in business and in life can help us make better decisions and can allow us to lead ourselves and others more effectively. It is through reflection that we can learn and then choose to adjust. Learning is never perfect and it is never complete." So David, again, thank you very, very much for your time this morning. I really got a lot out of that session. You gave me reminders of things to be paying attention to and what to focus on. I appreciate your guidance, and I really appreciate the work you do in the world of education. It's very important, and you're almost there. It's just a couple more, maybe another year or so. You'll be done. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. All right. Anything else for anybody before we complete? All right. Thanks for joining us, Adrian. Everybody else, thank you. Have a good day. Text me if you have questions. Thanks again, David. We'll see you guys later. Bye now.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.